Now, I've got with me, sitting next to me, it's Chris Pissarides of the Pissarides Review, and Jude Hillary is here in the middle from the Skills Imperative, and James Smith from the Resolution Foundation is on the end. And I think the opportunity we have now is to stitch together these three really interesting complementary views and approaches to the same questions, the same themes. These are three of the Foundation's definitional projects. I might say that's why we've spent £7 million on them. And they really pull together, I think, a theme which has not only been critical to the way Nuffield has looked at its agenda for the past 5 years, but will inevitably be as critical in the next 5. And that's why part of our intention today is to look ahead and say, what are the questions that emerge from this research? What are the further questions of research that we should be taking forward in the years ahead? Because this clearly defines in the future of work and well-being, the future of the British economy, what goes on in terms of our education. These are the themes central to Nuffield's purpose. And what struck me, actually, was we have Resolution's macro picture, which is nothing less than the strategic shaping of the British economy, linking to the NFER's micro approach to what are these skills and aptitudes that we need to identify if that macro ambition is to take place. And Chris, it seems to me that the Pissarides review underpins both these with pretty fundamental questions about the nature of AI and technological change and the implications of the quality of work and the quality of skills that are needed. And so before we take audience questions, before we look at those questions of the nature of skills, and in particular the importance of place, which I think dominates a lot of this discussion, I'd just like to stand back for a moment and ask you, Chris, there was something that Magna and Berta said right at the end there, that innovation and social progress advance together. And I think the question I'd like to ask you is, how far is this exponential wave of innovation that we're seeing with digital technologies and AI different in kind to previous moments of technological disruption and change? I mean, if I was sitting here not talking to you, but say to Sir John Stuart Mill at the end of the 19th century, he would probably have looked back for all the suffering of the 19th century. Innovation and social progress had advanced together. Do you think that is in doubt? Do you think that, or is it something which is likely to happen? Is it preordained, in other words?
Well, it's a very good question, and thank you very much for asking. But first, let me thank the Nuffield Foundation for their generosity of funding this and how grateful we are to be put together with these other complementary groups. As you said, it's absolutely the case. There is macro, there is micro, and we're discovering that there is both, and we're putting them together. Now, in terms of the innovation, I absolutely agree that that this time is different, but not different for the reasons that we hear very often in the media, that there's never been anything like this, it's bigger than before, and all that. I don't think we can rank technological innovations to those size and influence until much later in their life, and we are not there yet with AI. Where it's different is that John Stuart Mill and Keynes, I would have thought up to the very recent times, up to Alan Turing, if you like, they would have said that technological innovation and social progress are going together. The best example, in my view, is electricity. When electricity was invented, we could light up our streets, we could electrify our homes, and eventually, in fact, soon after, we had access to a whole wealth of domestic appliances that made domestic work much easier. It freed loads and loads of domestic workers, mostly women. It freed them from those low productivity jobs in the home, some of them unpaid, if they were members of a family, and go out in the market and do other things they wanted and for sure they found more interesting. That's not the case with AI. Here we have a choice how to apply it. In some sense, we don't need it in a sense to carry on. You know, we have been fine, thank you very much, without it. But given that we have it, we can use it to our benefit and to achieve much more greatness, if you like, in our social life. But unfortunately, it's also open to abuse and things that would set us back. And it's up to us how to do it. I can give you many, many examples. I can take just one very simple and very quick, because I realize there will be other interesting things that we hear over there. I mean, take drones. Drones are wonderful devices if you want to identify distant forest fires and deal with them quickly. In agriculture, they have a lot of use. You can identify areas of ripe produce, so you target your collections. You send robots to collect, in fact, related technology. You could identify dry areas, so you water them. You target your watering. You don't just open the floodgates and flood all the fields because somewhere they might need water. All those things are beneficial for the environment, for the productivity of agriculture, for everything else. But at the same time, drones could be developed into the lowest cost mass-killing devices, because they are not manned. They go there independently. It doesn't matter if you lose them, and they can do a lot of damage.
Also, this sort of bifurcation, Magda was saying in that presentation just now, applies to the workplace too. I was very interested by her differentiation between, in shorthand, what she called smartphone technologies, which increase empowerment and efficiency in people's working lives. And then those other technologies which increase anxiety, which are quite coercive, surveillance and less discretion, which seem to undermine agency. And I was wondering how you see this. To what extent is there a capacity in this digital transformation to actually reduce productivity and to lessen work satisfaction and hence the well-being that you're looking for?
There are devices that complement labor. Smartphone devices could do that. Of course, they could also be abused. This is not looking, take it out and chat into your friends. So that's another we need to be aware of. What we are finding is evidence that workers like the complementary devices, your laptops, communication, either phone or other means. But they feel threatened, partly things that they don't understand what they're doing and what the intentions of management are. And that's where communication becomes very important. Treating workers as your stakeholders, as a part of the group that is producing whatever the company wants to produce. Or devices that they obviously see that they could be doing things that they are doing, and therefore they might be losing their jobs. And at the same time, communication, again, would help. And what would especially help there, and would completely remove this fear, is a good system of training and adaptation to the technologies that the company might have. And we have examples of companies that are doing it. They are the champions of the future. That's where workers feel happier. But the majority of companies are not doing it. And I think, given what we've been finding, I think the failure here is in management. It's the management system that we have, especially in this country, actually. Americans and the Germans are doing better, I think, there. Managers don't get themselves involved with their workers and at their workplace to the extent that there will be free exchange of ideas and free role changing, training, so that any equipment that comes in becomes complementary to labor rather than competitive. It could be done. The CBI admit that it's very difficult. We know that would be better, but we don't know how to do it. That's in print. It's not something I heard confidentially from them. I think that's where we should be focusing.
That's interesting, because not only the issue of management, the issue of policy too, James. Listening to the Resolution Foundation's putting forward its vision, the issue of good work and how good work in policy is enshrined is absolutely critical to this, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the really big thing about all this is we have all this change, which Chris is talking about. We have some of the shocks and the legacy of this period of stagnation that we've had since the financial crisis, and coming with that is this really high inequality. So not only do we have incomes that have barely grown over the past 15 years, we have incomes for particularly the bottom half of the distribution that are doing worse than in other countries. And that really sort of stands out. And when you try and think about both of those things, obviously we have to think about what's happening with technology, where productivity might go in the future. But what's happening right now is productivity is stagnating. And when you look at why productivity is stagnating, which really stands out when you compare the UK to other countries, is the sort of distributional aspect of this geographically. So our cities, our big cities outside of London, are doing much worse than those in some other key countries. So if you look at Manchester's level of productivity compared to London, it's about a third lower. If you look at Lyon compared to Paris, it's more like 20%. So there's really big differences. And we're an economy, as we've been hearing about, that is well placed to take on new technologies. We have specialisms, and as we heard about in the presentation, that focus on the service sector. I think that the UK is amazingly the world's second biggest exporter of services, given the size of the country. It's obviously quite an achievement, and really doubling down on that and trying to use that to leverage good jobs. And then using policy to turn that into higher living standards across the board. That feels like the real heart of what's a combination of things that can address that low income, high inequality problem that we've got.
Come back to place and geography in a moment, because that's clearly key to this. But I think what was striking is how both from the Disruption Index and the Institute for Future of Work, the skills and job matching from NFER, and Resolution's commitment to the doubling down on the services economy, it takes us to the critical issue of what sort of skills as well as what sort of jobs. I'm going to turn to Jude now. That we saw in two of those presentations, clearly, as you put it, the growth is going to be in professional and associated professional jobs. That there will be need for expertise in technological literacy, cybersecurity, AI, cloud solutions. I think what's interesting about your work is it suggests that essential employment skills are much broader than that. And I'm quite interested for you to say a little bit more about what I thought was a really interesting insight, that a lot of the skills that we're teaching now are going to be equally in demand, but we're going to need more of them. And so in this question of continuity and change, where's your research taking you on this?
So, just echo Chris's sentiments at the beginning. Thanks very much to the Nuffield Foundation for funding this really exciting project. We started out by looking at what jobs are likely to exist in the future. So we forecasted what the labour market might look like in 2035, and then from that we forecast what skills will be needed to do those jobs. And what we found actually was that the top 20 skills that are in use today are actually going to be the same skills that are going to be needed in the future. And we identified the top 6 actually, which we call the essential employment skills, which were mentioned on the film there. Which as I sort of say, they're the skills which are in most demand today. So what's so exciting about that finding? Well, the thing is actually what we're going to need is more of those skills, but also a higher level of those skills. And the reason we need a higher level of those skills is much of the job growth that we're forecasting in the next 15 years by 2035 is actually at the top end of the occupational hierarchy. So it's professional jobs and associate professional jobs, and to a lesser extent, caring and leisure jobs, occupations. Most of the other occupations, particularly those at the bottom, are going to see a decline in their relative share of jobs in the economy in future.
Well, then take in the case of care and health, there you have traditionally low-paid jobs, which are going to increase in number, but not necessarily in reward.
Yes. Well, we haven't looked at those sort of micro effects, but yes, with an aging population, you would expect there to be an increased focus on care in the future, and with people having potentially more money at the top end of the distribution, leisure opportunities too.
But in terms of, if you like, teaching these skills, collaboration, communication, creativity, problem solving, they're much more broad spectrum than, for instance, I'm going to turn to Chris here, actually, because I saw a really interesting interview you did with Bloomberg just at the end of last year, where you challenged the Prime Minister on the emphasis in increasing STEM subjects, saying, actually, the sorts of skills that we need in an AI world should not be defined just as STEM skills. They're far more multifaceted than that. Just say a bit more about that.
I absolutely believe that, actually, based on the basis of our work. I mean, because of computers and programming and new things coming on the market all the time, we think, oh, wow, we're going to learn STEM, we're going to do the next programming, we're going to have a startup, and we're going to become very rich and very famous very quickly. It just doesn't work like that. A very small number of people might do it, but the vast majority of jobs will need what I call in the interview, actually, empathy skills. There is the health issue. There are the person-to-person services. What you call people skills, I think, in the video, and that's where we should be specializing, or other office jobs. Now, we do need some technical skill. We do need mathematics. It doesn't matter. Forget mathematics now and never again, or forget how to do basic computing. Whatever job you get, you need to know how to work with basic software. But whereas when we were looking at skills, we were looking at millions of advertising, as Bertha said, and when you look back, even 6 years ago, the main skill that was required in computing was internet browsing, ability to deal with retail platforms, being able to work with Microsoft Word and spreadsheets. Those are not mentioned anymore because they're part of our basic knowledge. But you do need to know how to use the Microsoft Office, so any job you get. But that's not what we mean by STEM. You don't need the very highly qualified ones, because you become a super programmer, you learn programming, you develop some super AI project, and then that project does the programming much better than you. I mean, look at ChatGPT; it's much better programming than most. And that's why I use the phrase that many STEM skills are sowing the seeds of their own destruction.
So, I mean, taking that to you, Jude, as you have this quote, there's no coordinated plan across government to address the growing challenge of skills shortages. Seems to be a separate question, too. Is government clear? Are we clear about the nature of the education that we should be providing?
Well, I mean, that is one of the challenges. So I would argue that they're not there yet. Certainly, the education system very much is about acquiring knowledge, and there's a lot of noise about it needing to develop skills in the future. And but there are a lot of challenges already with the education system in this country. We have this enormous disadvantage gap, which is actually worse than it's been for the last decade. Our post-16 outcomes are very poor compared to internationally. And actually, one aspect of this project that we're leading is actually going to be looking at what we can learn from other countries about what they're doing to develop these essential employment skills. So, but there's a big conversation to be had actually, and we're bringing the evidence to bear. We haven't hit the education bit yet of our study, but we're certainly going to be looking at some of these things, such as how young people develop skills while in education, and how skills develop depending on different routes that you take from education to work, etc., which will hopefully inform this debate. But certainly, without having done the research, I think one of the big questions will be how are we going to help our young people to develop these essential employment skills while they're in the education system. And almost certainly that's going to take you into discussions about the curriculum. It's really worth sort of highlighting the importance of this, because 1/3 of the people who will be in the labour market in 2035 will be joining in the next 10 to 15 years. So, it's really important that we make sure these young people are joining the labour market with the skills that they're going to need.
This also now should take us to place, and it should take us to the issue of geographic, regional disparities too. You've already said, James, you've talked about the second city problem as key to your analysis. The problems of Birmingham and Manchester just not being comparable to Toulouse and Lyon. You also said the economy needs to double down on the service sector. As I quote you, Martin Wolf from the FT, who's been hugely complimentary of your work, he seems to have cannibalized it for a host of articles, but he was grumpy at one stage when he said of your analysis, this priority looks ideal for skilled professionals living predominantly in London. What would it mean for the less skilled living elsewhere? And he went on, how does the promotion of high-wage services generate income across the country? It would surely end up concentrating more population and wealth in London and the southeast. The scale of shift that you're requiring is quite colossal, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And, there's certainly a grain of truth in what Martin is saying there. So what we're doing is we're looking at how you would improve productivity, what really stands out, what are the big gains that you would have to make. And improving services, working in your big cities, because that's where services thrive. So you take the strength of the UK in terms of its very clear international advantages in terms of producing services, and you combine it with where we're weakest geographically, and you bring those two ideas together. And then really trying to address that is a coordinated, it's city design, it's transport, it's skills, it's migration, and it's thinking about change and how things move forward. But I think it's very important. I mean, we touched on social care, for example, as an area that's clearly going to grow as society ages. What I think we need to do is really think about how to generate good jobs that will provide high levels of income, living standards going forward, and will drive growth overall. And doing that is really focusing job growth in your growing sectors. So that's your services strategy. That's our cities, but it's also thinking about how you make sure there are good jobs all across the economy. So, for example, in making sure that you enforce standards across the labour market, making sure people have hours contracts that reflect the actual hours they work. So 0 hours contracts being the most egregious example there. So making sure that you don't have jobs with poor prospects in terms of pay and training in any sectors, including, the sectors are going to be spread beyond cities. So I think there's very much a cities focus in terms of growth strategy, but I think the offer has to be beyond cities. It has to be good jobs in places around the country, not just in cities, and not just services. So services obviously are very important, but the UK has a clear strengths in manufacturing sectors as well that we can double down on, and bringing together trade, geography, and labour market policies with a range of other policies. That's what the Economy 2030 inquiry is all about. And I think, it's really to the credit of Nuffield, LSE, who we've worked with, the Resolution Foundation, that we think in that joined up way. And that's the way we're really going to break out of some of the problems you described earlier.
Coming briefly, Chris, I know we've got some questions that have come in. I'm going to invite Emily in to ask them in a moment. But Chris, what did you want to add?
One thing we intend to do more of, because we're seeing some signs in the data, is that Manchester and the Merseyside, Lancashire area, they are showing signs of revival in new technologies and attracting investments in these new venture capital investments. It's the first signs that we see of that kind of activity outside London, and I agree with Martin Wolf actually in that it's very difficult to break the monopoly of London in business services and finance. I'm not even sure if it's worth breaking it actually, because you do need this agglomeration. But there are things, new age manufacturing and all that could be done elsewhere, and we're seeing signs that at least the Manchester area is picking that up, and we intend to do a lot more work in the final months of our project on that.
This is what Keith Burnett will pick up with the second panel in a moment. Precisely these issues. But I'm now going to turn to Emily, who's been listening to what people who are listening want to talk to us about.
Yes, and thank you very much to everyone who has put questions. We've had some really fascinating ones. I'd like to begin, first of all, Jude, if I may pose one to you. We've heard a lot about regional and local areas and the importance of those in what we're talking about. We haven't heard a great deal about the extent to which all the projects have covered the whole of the UK or not. And I wondered if you could just say a few words about the extent to which perhaps Skills Imperative has, and what's the same, what's different, what do we need to be thinking about?
So the Skills Imperative does, to some extent, cover the UK, and in some places covers just England, and there are good reasons for that. So the labour market projections that we produced, we have, in conjunction with yourselves and with DFE, we produce subnational breakdowns by country and by regions within country, also by mayoral combined authorities, etc., etc. So that's a very good place to start if you're looking at changes between countries. It's been a while since I've looked at the differences between countries, but certainly I think England will see most of the growth alongside Scotland, if I remember correctly. But in other areas of the study, we've looked primarily at England, and that's primarily to do with the data sets that are available, which they're not comparable between Scotland and other countries outside of England. So you're not able to do the same analysis. But where we can, we are looking across the piece. So, but in terms of the skills that are needed, in England, the essential employment skills that we're talking about, these are the ones which are most in demand in England now. We think they're going to be most in demand in England in the future. We have no reason to believe that that's not the case in other countries within the UK.
Thank you. And if I might just change tack a bit, because we've got so many different topics raised. Chris, we had a question around the efficiency potential benefits of new technologies, and the extent to which those are shared evenly between employees and employers. And one question specifically from Joe Ryle about what promise AI and technology has for a shorter working week. Is that something that has come up at all in your review of around well-being and job satisfaction?
Yeah, it has come up. It has come up a lot, actually, because there will be the opportunity to save working hours. Now, some people interpreted that as loss of jobs. I don't think that's where it's going to show up. I think it's going to show up as changing roles and a set of tasks that people can do within a company. And because the expectation is that productivity will go up in adopting AI and the new automation technologies, one way of taking those extra gains is in the form of fewer hours of work rather than higher pay. Obviously, you cannot have both unless you have vast increases in productivity. And there is support for that. We see it in surveys of workers that they'd love to have more flexibility. Many, I've seen a survey recently, about 30% of workers would love a 4-day week. And we're moving in that direction. We do know that with countries that experience increases in productivity, they do reduce their hours of work. So I see that moving in that direction, either an extra day off or in flexibility in the time, working from home, fewer hours.
Interesting. It's a hugely topical area, so I'm sure we'll hear lots more about that. James, if I could turn to you. We've had a few questions around the employer perspective on this, and in particular, why is it that employers are investing less in skills over time when what we're hearing today is that the labour market's moving towards higher skilled work? Why is that, and what do you think can be done about it?
Yeah, it's a really key topic this. So, if you look at the UK relative to other countries, what really stands out in terms of looking at the differences in how productive we are is, if you compare to a country like France, workers have much less physical capital, software, computers, but also buildings and plant and machinery and that sort of thing than those other countries. That's a key thing that's holding us back. And part of that's about the weakness of the economy. Part of that is about that we've had since the financial crisis. Part of that's about some of the policy issues, so high uncertainty post referendum. That's all been a big headwind to investment. But there's really key things that I think we don't talk much about, like ownership of firms. We don't have particularly strong ownership of firms. We don't have good incentives to reallocate highly productive workers or physical capital to more productive firms. So trying to reduce and get some of the bottlenecks out of that system. So we can do that through the tax system, you do that through the planning system, but really, thinking beyond the very obvious things that are up in lights holding back investment, I think is key.
That's interesting. And then we had a question which I thought was really interesting about this challenge that there's something of a disconnect between the predictions of skills demand and what people see as the kind of real actual labour market, where there are a lot of low-skilled jobs and a lot of people coming out of education system, as you mentioned in the Economy 2030 inquiry, with low skills. So what is it that explains that? How should we be thinking about that? Is there anything that anyone wants to add around that?
So skills, so I think.
Well, so one of the things we did actually, as you know, Emily, is we've done this employee skills survey. Generally speaking, when you ask, the sources of information out there about skills, it's the employer's perspective. We've done the opposite. We've asked employees about their essential skills, and without sort of letting the cat out of the bag, what we found actually is that there is a skills underutilization of employees, and it's the same employee occupational groups actually that employers are often reporting sort of skills gaps on. So there seems to be a miscommunication there, maybe, that we need to sort of understand, and we're thinking about that at the moment, about how we're going to present that in our next working paper. But it seems to be
reflect what Chris was saying about the management issues in UK management, perhaps. That same point.
I'm just about to sort of say that it's consistent with both of what these other studies are sort of saying. But it's giving that employee perspective. So that's really interesting.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're pretty much out of time, Tim. So back to you.